No, I'm being serious. Williams, they're legit scaring the top teams. Even McLaren's Andrea Stella is looking at them and going, wait, should we be worried about these guys? Apologies, I didn't mean to scare you like that. But McLaren team principal Andrea Stella really did say something which piqued my interest. And then Alpine's gang boss Flavio Briatore said something which made me go, oh, you did not just go there. Oh, you female dog, you. Don't make me use this on you. Yeah, this is a real thing. We got a show dog. We're literally preparing for crufts as we speak with this fluffy slug down here. Anyway, you might be bored of me spouting out yet another Williams Carlos Sainz piece, but the team is making headlines for all the right reasons, which is a darn sight more pleasing to be saying after the last couple of years of turgid content about them. But as a McLaren fan, given that the team boss of my favourite team said what he said, the spanner of speculation I'm not going to be wielding today. I don't need it. I feel like this is legit. And what Williams is saying to counter it and managing expectations, oh, I'm finding that refreshing indeed. Well, you see, Andrea Stella isn't one for exaggeration. If anything, he's brutally honest. So when he says Williams is a team to watch out for in Australia, yeah, that would get my attention. So here's what Stella said, which made me sit up and take notice, and why I think Williams could be angling for some decent points in Melbourne. In the past, we used to talk about the top three. Thankfully, McLaren has kind of added. Now we have the top four. But perhaps this year, we might have to adapt our language again, which will be great for Formula 1. And then maybe the top 5 or top 6. I've seen that in terms of one-lap pace in addition to the top 4, certainly Williams, very competitive. I'm sure everyone will have seen the same data that I look at. And it's interesting that, for instance, Williams was very strong in the second sector, that's of Bahrain, which is not only a sector of braking, acceleration, it's also a sector with a couple of medium-speed corners. I think this should say that Williams might have improved in that area. But in that same article from Speed Cafe, James Vowles takes a more different stance. He provides a contrasting outlook. While Stella's study reveals a significant shift in the pecking order potentially, including some not really convincing modesty by just going, us? Part of the top 3? I mean, I suppose. Vowles, on the other hand, is a little bit more wary, claiming that several fuel mix options, engine modes and power settings could have been observed in Bahrain, masking the team's actual capacity, as well as others. The only thing that James Vowles knows for sure at the moment, or at least he's trying to convey to the world, is his caffeine intake. And that is the thing. James and Andrea both have some really good points. Anything can happen this season, especially the whole point that Stella made. 6 teams could be angling for points and that any one of them could slip up over the course of a season, meaning that the others from down below might be able to take some pickings away. So I'm seriously reckoning that anybody who finds themselves in 4th place in the Constructors, I'm predicting Red Bull at the moment, could find themselves having to fend off the likes of Williams who might be nipping at their heels, especially since Carlos Sainz himself said that the best that maybe Williams can hope for is 7th place, and 7th place is still representative of the 4th fastest car, so there is some glimmer of hope here, even in Sainz's pragmatic words, so interesting. And why I find this particularly intriguing is that both men are very technically minded, Stella and Vowles. They don't tend to get all dramatic and over the top. They tend to be overly honest about certain situations, with James in particular garnering that kind of reputation, as well as being a little bit deprecating toward his own team, but in a refreshing sense. In short, you could say that Williams did impress enough to catch the attention of what many bookies are considering the favourites for the team title this year, but thankfully, Williams is not allowing itself to get ahead of its own goals. 2026 is still the mission. Hey, if 2025 turns out to be a pretty good season, then that's pretty neat, that's a nice little bonus, but it's why I don't think Williams were that bothered, them going from 7th in 2023 to 9th in 2024. It didn't really matter in terms of their grand plan. It's why I reckon that, unlike 2014, where we saw Williams finish 3rd for 2 years and then they fell off, this time around in 2026, this turnaround, which I think will happen if they can nail the regulations, will be long-lasting. It'll mean more. It'll count for something. The team doesn't have to rely on power units and Felipe Massa to make up for the shortfall. And no amount of money or good fortune or sponsors or any of the like will get in the way of James's plan. which is not what could be said over at likes of Alpine, who will basically take anybody with a huge checkbook. I am terribly sorry for that outdated quip. Who uses checkbooks these days? I mean, just shows my age. And it also shows why Carlos chose Williams over Alpine. The long-term roadmap seems much more genuine since, well, James learnt from Ross Brawn, need I say more? In contrast, Alpine might be feeling the heat from Williams' long-term ambitions. Because even though Briatore keeps pushing the idea of them having a multi-year plan, let's just be real here. What you've been saying the last few months, it all sounds more like an investor pitch rather than an actual roadmap laid out for a Formula One team, especially since he's been emboldened by Renault Group CEO Luca De Meo. Luca basically saying, "Alright boss, you figure it out." So with that mandate to basically do whatever he wanted, Flavio decided to go for the two best options at the time that were available: Adrian Newey, Carlos Sainz. And in the end, he failed on both counts. All because in the case of Newey, Aston Martin had deeper pockets, Fernando Alonso, and a little more audacity to just spend whatever is necessary. They got slapped on the wrist by the Italian courts for enabling the inbound technical director Enrico Cardile to breach his gardening leave before Ferrari said so. Oops. And speaking of an Italian, Flavio Briatore had some comments to share with Netflix in the new season of Drive to Survive. It's been seeping out through various early reviews, and I think the people over at Netflix are salivating with what Flavio has to say, because he wears his heart on his sleeve, and what he said regarding the whole thing with Carlos Sainz, since I think there is a whole episode dedicated to the Spaniards, since it's called Carlos Sainz, this is what he had to say in the Drive to Survive thing, courtesy of F1 Oversteer. Ahem. I need a driver in 2025, he asked Carlos Sr. I need Carlos. I know him from when he was a child, and we have a very super relationship, especially his father. I told the father one day, maybe we work together. But Carlos believes Alpine was not good enough for him, and Williams was much better. Simple as that. Everybody makes mistakes. Oh, Flav, I'm taking off the cap, But in all fairness, let's just be honest. Briatore is known for mixing personal anecdotes with bold, opinionated commentary, and Netflix is lapping it up. His claim of having known Carlos Sainz since childhood, along with emphasizing a super relationship with the family, it aligns with previous insider narratives. His assertion that Sainz rejected Alpine in favour of Williams, it fits a broader context of driver market discussions where personal loyalty and long-term relationships play significant roles. And given the fact that Briatore has been known to just be brutally honest about things and very, very blunt and very to the point, I seriously believe he did have a conversation with Carlos Sainz Sr., and Carlos Sainz Sr. was in the opinion that, hey, maybe this whole thing was just simply not worth it, as well as the fact that Carlos Jr. made it a very clear point that he wanted to have options for 2026, whereas Flavio tends to like multi-year deals that you simply cannot get out of unless you completely suck, which we are seeing, ironically, from Franco Colapinto getting that 5-year deal. Carlos was going to have a 4-year deal with Alpine with no get-out clause. But maybe what Flavio's trying to say is that Alpine right now for 2025, they're looking incredibly bullish and that they might actually get some good results this year. And you know what? Even though I am disparaging the Italian team principal, because he is the team principal, really, sorry Oliver, I do feel like this is a genuine potential, that Alpine has legs, at least for this year. Because the additional team that Stella kind of mentioned, albeit less directly, was the likes of Alpine. And despite Briatore posturing the idea of a long-term plan, chastising the likes of Sainz who wanted something less long-term, it's evident that the Alpine organisation, they're looking to go for glory this year, at perhaps the expense of the new regulation cycle, something of which Pierre Gasly has expressed concern over, saying that if he were a team boss, he'd be thinking of 2026 instead of this year, him being willing to sacrifice this year for the next. And you can tell that Flavio was bitter about the whole situation, because then he went on to say in another interview, oh, well, none of the top teams took him on anyway, so no. Oh, that's it! But despite my remarks and jibes, I do predict Alpine to finish ahead of Williams this year. Not because they would be fundamentally better than James Vowles' squad now they've gotten rid of Excel spreadsheets, but simply because the latter knows when to quit, whereas the former doesn't. They'll allow their rivals to romp away with short-term gains if it means a more likely chance of getting off on the right foot later, and for many, many years. So even though you might be thinking I'm some kind of traitor by putting Pierre Gasly as the best of the rest over Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon, it is for good reason. I do reckon that the for now, French team will be giving the Frenchmen all that they have, lock, stock and barrel, the whole kitchen sink, everything to make sure that he can score regular points, ideally top 5 finishes like he had at the end of the season, and ensure that Alpine secure the best of the rest position, maybe even give the team in 4th place in the Constructors a little bit of a spook every now and again. That kind of mentality might have put up the Spaniard and his mentor father, because simply for the fact, despite the promises of long-term success, at the time there was nothing tenable to really look at and believe in, such as the Mercedes power unit deal for 2026. Because according to Briatore himself, that deal was still in discussions, early negotiations. It hadn't been locked in at the time when Carlos was talking with the Italians, so it stands to reason this was going to be a huge deal for Carlos. This was going to be the next phase of his career, at least the next 3 or 4 years, or whenever a spot at the top teams became available again. Maybe a return to Ferrari or McLaren, or Red Bull might take a look at him, and they shouldn't have used him as some kind of bargaining chip for Renault back in the day. But no, at the time, Alpine and Williams and then Sauber, they were the only options, whereas Williams, out of all of them, did look the most credible. Honestly, and this is not me being biased here, I would trust things that James would say to me more than Flavio. Flavio knows how to spin. Briatore is a good salesman because that's what he was. He was a sales clerk for Benetton, and then the Benetton organization put him in charge of the F1 team because he was good selling clothes. No joke, look it up on his Wikipedia page. And this other thing that I think Carlos Sainz would appreciate is that at Williams, there's no sugarcoating their situation because no one would believe otherwise. There have been plenty of false dawns the teams have had. Vowles has done nothing of the sort to say that everything's hunky-dory at Williams. He's been saying a lot of things in excruciating detail as to why things need to change, and is more than prepared to face the wrath of social media to prove his point. No, seriously, you've got to remember what happened the first half of last year, the whole chassis gate of Albert Park last year, that people were saying, oh, James Vowles is a terrible team principal, how dare he treat Logan that way? But then Franco arrived, and then all was forgiven. Well, okay, you probably want to know that at the end of the day, after pre-season testing, what does Carlos Sainz think of the situation? Has he got something that he can work with? Well, put simply, he's keeping it real. And honestly, that's what makes the whole story even more compelling. In a press junket with the media, the Spaniard was adept in contrasting the more optimistic tones of one of his former McLaren colleagues with the personal convictions of Flavio Briatore, whilst also still aligning with his new team's long-term vision, with Sainz bluntly stating, "You won't see me on the podium or in the top 5 this year." So even though Carlos has only been working with this team for a couple of months, he is singing from the same hymn sheet. And I'll tell you one thing, the only video that I watched on Pancake Day was from the authority himself. There's just something about his aura which I really, really love. And then I watched a video where he was a guest at Stanley Tucci's dinner table, and I found out that his spirit animal was this guy. Hey, just quick question, who do you think is his Pumbaa? But in all seriousness, he's saying that Williams haven't made yet the significant strides needed to rival the elite right now. He acknowledges that whilst the car has improved and the team is moving in the right direction, it's too early to expect immediate front-running performances. And it's a perfectly reasonable shout. That's not what Williams is subscribing to at the moment. But I'll tell you what to subscribe to. This channel, right here. Just press the button, subscribe, please. Thank you. This measured outlook stands in contrast to Stella's bullish claims that Williams could break into the top 4. A prediction Sainz finds flattering, yes, but ultimately premature. Meanwhile, you got Briatore over here having his candid assertion that he needs Carlos, and his long-standing, almost familial connection with the Sainz family highlights the personal value he places on Carlos. So sure, there's a genuine desire to work with him, and he believes that he is an ideal driver for the future, maybe a potential world champion. But despite that supposed closeness, it just was not enough for Sainz to work with. Because for Flavio, he wants loyalty. It's either 4 years or nothing in his eyes. So even though he remembers Carlos Sainz Jr. from when he was a kid, he's still not prepared to just go with the idea of, oh, this guy will be here for a couple of years and then he'll swan off. I think he is fully aware of what happened when Schumacher did the same thing to him at the end of his contract and went over to the likes of Ferrari to then realize his dream there. And then when Alonso left Renault to go to McLaren, yeah, you can tell that that man is bitter for things that happened 20, 30 years ago. He does not want to go through the same thing again with Carlos Sainz. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Franco sees out his contract that the Argentinian will do the same thing if another team comes a-knocking. Maybe even Williams. But in all seriousness, Carlos's comments, they're a reality check, underscoring the current limitations and the need for further development before Williams can compete with the front-running teams, which is what the plan is for 2026. And again, this is why the entire story feels novel. It's this reality check which is making all of the top teams pay more attention to it. It would be all very well and good for Williams to just say, we're really, really good, and everyone has a target on their back next year. Wait, why does that sound familiar? But Alpine and Williams, they are very much entwined in 2025's overall narrative. They're polar opposites of one another. And the fate of each team next year, it's going to be captivating to watch. And surely Drive to Survive's got to pick up on this. Because they are two sides of the same coin. Alpine wants things in the here and now, where Williams, they're prepared to wait a little bit for it. Both teams impressed in pre-season testing. Alpine were much faster than they were last year, and Williams showed that last year they did have a decent car, but they didn't have the right tools in which to build it and make it halfway decent. Now they do, they're right back up there again, and they are a contender for that coveted best of the rest position of 5th. I do think Aston Martin will have a lot to do if they want to try and keep it for a 3rd year in a row. Alpine, I do find very convincing, despite me being overall negative toward them at the moment. And again, I expect Pierre Gasly, their team leader, to be getting everything possible to score regular points and cement the team in that position, whether he has Jack Doohan next to him or Franco Colapinto. At this point, in terms of the team target, they will do anything possible to make that 5th place happen, by any means necessary. Yeah, this year will be good for them, but I do think it'll mean that next year's operation, it will look a little anemic, and that means they would be struggling. But hey, if that ends up being the case and Renault does offload the team to another buyer, then it's not their problem anymore. What does it matter to Renault? They'll have left the team on a good note, so... And as for Williams, this entire escapade has proved to me undoubtedly the hype is something with real substance behind it. And why Carlos chose what he chose, and this quote in particular, is just so feisty that I won't do the voice. If I came to Williams, it's to take this team forward, and I hope I can do that. And the first thing, topping F1 preseason testing, at least serves to show people that I'm coming for it. We're going for it. Oh, I can't tell you how satisfying that sounds. And I do believe that it's that kind of talk that will attract more and more fans to Williams and their cause. That maybe this isn't a false dawn after all. That maybe whatever they get this year and next, if they do nail the regulations like James Vowles hopes to, then Williams might be in for a really good period where they are a fairly decent team. Maybe back to where they were, ultimately, in the early 2000s. That, sure, maybe being the Constructors' Champions will be a tall order, but several wins would certainly be on the cards for them, or multiple podiums, or at least just not looking near the back, where they don't deserve to be, given their heritage and legacy. This kind of chatter around Williams kind of reminds me of two different teams. I would say, in terms of rebuilding and the structure, Haas of 2023, and then the overall vibe I'm getting is from 2019 McLaren, when they really needed to get their act together after a major reality check after Honda left, Renault came in, and then they realised, oh wait, no, the problem was us and the car. Oh. And that took 5 years for them to achieve their goal and get back up to the top, even though they did have some standout moments along the way while they were rebuilding from a troubled time. And guess who was with them at the time? One, Carlos Sainz. Then there was Ferrari. They had come off the back of a terrible 2020 when their power unit had been nobbled by the FIA. And Sebastian Vettel, his magic had eluded him, his passion was gone. Who was with them for the following year, helped aiding the Scuderia back to the top where they could win trophies? One, Carlos Sainz. And potentially, we're about to see the same thing happen with Williams. How big of an effect will it be? Will it be just as potent as McLaren and Ferrari? It's too early to say right now, but I certainly reckon the Spaniard will leave this team in a better state than it was in when he arrived. And right now, it just feels like Briatore is salty about it. Andrea, Stella and McLaren are hyped for the fact that they might have another rival to contend with and more battles to be had with a different team that isn't Red Bull or Mercedes or Ferrari, a classic legacy team to boot. And hey, Williams might not have landed Adrian Newey, but they got the next best thing in my honest opinion. They were able to convince a front-running driver to take a risk on them, take a chance, even though the last couple of years with that team hadn't been all that great. And that is a really major coup that they managed to get. Carlos Sainz may be the 4th oldest driver on the grid, but that age comes with a lot of wisdom and experience that many other drivers on the grid simply don't have. And not to mention that now he's a GPDA director with his own visions for the sport, which seem quite reasonable, such as, for example, the desire of maybe putting less of a priority in simulator work, maybe balancing out testing days so you can say, well, you can either do more testing time on the track, or you can do more testing time in the simulator. Whatever floats your boat, really. That sounds like a fairly reasonable proposition, Carlos. That's a really good opening gambit. What do you think, by the way, of that pitch from Carlos? Simulator or on track? Let you be the judge in the comments. And with each media session or testing event where the cars can show their true potential, it's more evidence for the top teams to sit up and take notice that maybe Williams is a team to pay attention to again. Granted, they won't be taking podiums away from them anytime soon, but they could easily nip at the heels of the team who finds himself in 4th place in the Constructors, as Sainz does imagine 7ths and 8ths are possible. Maybe even a cheeky 6th? And for a team such as Williams not in the top 4 at the moment, a 6th place is not something to turn your nose up at. Those 8 points can make the world of difference if they can acquire that. And considering one of the major issues Williams have had in the last couple of years has been their race pace, with many instances of Alex Albon finding himself in maybe 8th or 9th position on the track, and then eventually the tyres simply give out, and then I look again, he's down in 12th or 13th or something like that. One of the things that Carlos believes that he can bring to the table is the fact that he has race pace, that maybe he can keep the tyres in check, and maybe instead of losing that 8th and 9th, it becomes 12th or 13th, he could at least keep it in 10th. Meaning that at least they get a point, and those points, they add up in the midfield. That could make the world of difference, which might save Williams from falling down positions and grabbing an extra 10 million in the kitty. And while I am not going to be saying that Williams will be winning titles anytime soon, I'll tell you one thing that they've won right now, and that's respect. And that's a damn good start. And what I would respect from you right now is your opinion, as I go through my predictions for both the team and drivers titles of 2025. To find out who I reckon will win the whole shebang, as well as give you the chance to have your say, watch this video next, straight after this one.